Hello, friends, and welcome to UNC Asheville Conversations. I'm Bill Massey, the Vice Chancellor for Alumni and Development at UNC Asheville. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. You know, in a few weeks, our mountains are going to be filled with students arriving to continue their collegiate careers or to begin their collegiate careers at one of our four-year colleges and universities or one of our distinguished community colleges. We at UNC Asheville are delighted by the prospects that this represents, and we're thrilled by the renewal that the arrival of students brings to our community. You know, our students do bring with them a great vitality, an interest, a curiosity, a yearning for the experiences of the college environment, not to mention the economic impact that they represent in our region. One of the occasions that is most central to the UNC Asheville experience and to that of any of the colleges and universities is the annual commencement. And so as we look forward to the beginning of the school year, today I'd like to look back to the commencement here at UNC Asheville in May of this year. It was our pleasure to have as a distinguished guest Jonetta B. Cole. Dr. Cole, who many of you may know from her serving as president of Bennett College for Women in Greensboro, and prior to that, Spelman College in Atlanta, is an extraordinary visionary who brought to our campus a conversation that continues today about the value, the importance, and the benefits of diversity and inclusion in our communities and certainly here on our university campus. I had the great pleasure of sitting down for a conversation with Dr. Cole prior to commencement and would like to share parts of that conversation with you today. I hope that you will find it as interesting, as compelling, and intriguing, as well as challenging as I did. And I hope that you will give serious thought to many of the ideas that Dr. Cole shared with me. It's always a pleasure to welcome you to the University of North Carolina at Asheville. We invite you to our campus to be a part of the experience here. We know that you will get to know many of our students because they are actively involved in our community, and we appreciate the support that you bring to them and to the university. Thank you. It always is a pleasure to welcome guests to the University of North Carolina at Asheville. In this case, it's a special honor for the university to welcome Dr. Jonetta Cole, who on commencement morning, May 10th, 2008, received from the university the honorary degree of the Doctor of Humane Letters. Dr. Cole, it's such a pleasure to visit with you today and to learn more about you, your life's work, and the distinguished contributions that you have made in our state and well beyond our state, in the nation, and frankly, the world. So thank you for being here.
This is my joy. This is my pleasure to be here. This is an unusually special place, as you know. And I must say that I was very touched to be awarded a university's highest degree when it was a university that I deeply admire, whose sister chancellor I both respect and admire.
Great. Well, we thank you. Speaking of joy, your life has been filled with so many challenges, opportunities that you have seized to address issues, to look frankly at matters that needed your attention. Joy seems to come through all of your work. Is this a gift? Is this something you have cultivated? How do you bring joy to sometimes even depressing issues that have to be talked about?
I like that question so much. There's an expression that's often used within the African American community, and it does have a biblical base. And I certainly remember that Dr. Martin Luther King would use this expression. It says, no matter how dark the night, joy comes in the morning. I also remember Dr. King saying that it's only in the darkness of night that you can see the stars. And so in some ways, I think that my life has been so filled with joy because I've been conscious of the circumstances that have to be confronted, that we collectively have to change in order to know joy.
Mm. Well, your early years growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, were influenced entirely, I imagine, by parents who set a great example for you. Mm. Can you talk a little bit about your parents' role in helping you to see beyond a neighborhood, a city, a state, but to see the world as your palette?
Mm. Well, I think in many ways, I grew up within two realities. Anyone who is African American, and to some extent of other communities, for example, of a Jewish community or of an Asian American community, a Native American community, a Hispanic American community, who grew up in the South in a particular period of time, was being bombarded with a certain message. We don't want people mixing. This is a world fundamentally for white folk, but we have a few jobs assigned for you, and if you need the bus, you should go to the back. You could not escape those messages. But how fortunate I was to constantly receive a counter message. Yes, from my parents, but I must say also from my teachers in those segregated schools. I remember the message I would always receive from the librarian of the colored library. When I was a little brownie and finally got to be a Girl Scout in a segregated troop, the messages that I was receiving in Mount Olive AME Baptist Church. And so the circumstances under which I grew up taught me to listen to different voices, to hear different views, and to understand my responsibility to find what, for me, was truth. And so that counter message says, no, 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 no. It said, this is America. This is a place where ultimately folk of all experiences and backgrounds and conditions will have a place. Will have a place at a table that is large enough for everyone. And so I must come full forward and say that I find myself incredibly excited at a moment in the history of my country where language that I used to hear from my family, from my mom and my dad and my grandparents, my great-grandparents, is becoming now so much of a national conversation. During this presidential race, as we talk about the importance of making space for everyone.
Do you feel that the struggle, the sacrifice, the difficult questions that had to be answered or resolved are appreciated by the young people who are receiving diplomas at this and how many other universities in May of 2008? Do you feel that it's part of your responsibility to make sure that they are aware of what has preceded them? Do you worry that there is a discounting of struggles, not only in matters of race, but in matters of religion and gender and other sexual identity, etc.?
Well, I can never put all of the young'uns, as I affectionately call young people, into a single category. It doesn't work. If we say that all young people are just interested in themselves and in their self-aggrandizement, that doesn't work. if we say that all young people are all of a sudden deeply engaged in the world around them and understand their responsibility to make change. That doesn't work. And so, like almost anything else, we've got to see some complexity here. We've got to see texture, and we've got to see diversity. What I can say is that I've been very privileged to spend most of my adult life in the academy, in a place where young folk, not always young, sometimes older folk too, are at least in the most obvious ways asking questions, assuming that maybe they're not only to come to understand the world better, but to figure out their responsibility to help to make the world better. What has me profoundly excited now, almost obsessed about what's going on in my nation, is that so many young people have discovered the political process, seem to be wrestling with something called the American democracy, getting out and voting and participating in backing their candidate, whoever that candidate may be. But on the other hand, Bill, I think there's still the challenge of helping young folk to understand that it's not over, that victory is not here, that we are on a road, we are on a journey toward our nation reaching its own goals. But more folks seem to be on the journey, and that's a good thing.
Dr. Johnetta Cole, you have achieved so much, and I think of the fact that you began college as a 15-year-old student, and the bridge between starting college as a 15-year-old and the contribution that you've made not only in the academy but certainly to society on a global scale is enormous. What was it like to start college at age 15?
Well, I certainly had pushy black parents who said to me one day that there was a test being given to African American students, and if they passed the test, they would go off to college early. This was still in the days of racial segregation. Such an experiment had been done with white students, and so somebody, especially with the backing of the Ford Foundation, said, let's try this with black students. I didn't want to go to college at 15. I may have been kind of smart academically, but I was dumb because I didn't figure out that I could fail the test and I wouldn't have to go to college. So I did like a A-type person does. I went in and passed the test. And I went off to a place called Fisk University. And I could say this about all of our historically black colleges and universities. I think it could be said about our Hispanic serving institutions. It could be said about our tribal colleges. That until we make a welcoming environment in all of our colleges and universities, these special mission schools have provided an oasis for at least some students of color. And so, from the segregated circumstances of Jacksonville, Florida, I went, yes, to the segregated circumstances of Nashville, Tennessee, but I also went to Fisk University, a place with an enormous history and her story of black intellectual and cultural accomplishment. I went to Fisk assuming that I was going to be a pediatrician. Said I was going to be a baby doctor from the time that I was knee-high to a duck. But it was interesting. And this, I think, was the role of gender inequality, the role of sexism. It didn't occur to me that I could be a neurosurgeon. It didn't occur to me that I could be an internist, that I could be anywhere within the field of medicine. I was still assuming that as a female, I would be the baby doctor. And so I spent that year at Fisk University. It was also the year that my father died. And I was my daddy's baby girl, in a state of intense grieving over his death. I made the decision that my mom was right, my older sister was right. I should go to Oberlin, where she was, my older sister. And so I'm sharing that with you to say that I have been very fortunate to have two experiences, that in a historically black university and that in one of our country's most distinguished small liberal arts colleges, Oberlin College. It was at Oberlin that I discovered this field whose word or whose term I could hardly pronounce, anthropology. And so I've taken perhaps too long to say to you that going to a university at 15 was something that I didn't want to do, but I'm really very grateful because it means that I had kind of a head start on being exposed to the stuff that can only come in a highly intellectual and cultural environment, and during a period of true activism. Because when I went off to Fisk as well as to Oberlin, these were times when our country was really struggling. We were trying to figure out what we were going to do about the race question. This was a heightened period of the civil rights movement when students as well as older folk were finding a way to say, we got to fix this. We've got to re-engineer this, because racism is not only destructive and detrimental to black folk, it is no less destructive and detrimental to all folks.
And we continue on that journey today. Do you envision that that the idealism of youth is reignited again in this political climate where, as you said, we as a country were seeking an answer to questions about race? We today perhaps are seeking answers, continue to seek answers to questions of race, but also identity in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Your experiences at Fisk and at Oberlin were during the days of idealism in young people. I, as a college president, do you continue to see that idealism reborn generationally? Is it the same? How is it different? Does it inspire you as a leader?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it inspires me. You know, I'm somehow at this moment very conscious that I'm sitting in North Carolina. I'm in Asheville. I'm the day after commencement. I have never been to a commencement that I didn't love, because in so many ways, it captures for young folk. Although, again, we must always honor those who are mature, more mature, better put, who have come back into an academic setting. But a commencement is always that moment when it honors dualities. It's the end of the university experience, but it is the beginning of the next phase. It is the cherishing of what has been somewhat of a protected and an idealistic environment, and the beginning now of living in circumstances that are perhaps far more complex and at times really brutal. And so I love commencements. I love the privilege of being with young people. What is most disturbing for me is to be with young'uns who are not idealistic, who don't believe that Margaret Mead was right, that we should never, ever doubt the ability of a small group of committed citizens to change the world It's the only way it ever happens. And so if one is not idealistic in one's youth, where is there to go? I think at this moment about the women of Bennett College for Women. Up the road a piece in Greensboro, North Carolina, a city you know very well. When I was in the presidency at Bennett, I was deeply moved by the sense of political activism of Bennett students. It's a long, we would say at a women's college, her story of those young women who joined the four, Greensboro Four from North Carolina A&T. When those four young men went downtown in Greensboro and sat down and refused to move, when they began the sit-in movement, we need to remember there were 250 Bennett women who went to jail for that movement. Those young women said, we have to change this. And one of my sheroes, because you know for every hero in the world there's at least a shero, was the then President Dr. Willoughby Player, who in her very prim and proper way, at Bennett we still talk about player black pumps and player pearls, would go to the jail in the morning, taking the homework for the students, and come back at night, pick up that homework, and deliver it to the faculty members. Because at Bennett, there was this sense that they had to learn the stuff, but they also had to be agents of change. And so by the time I got to Bennett, many, many years later, I remember during the last presidential election that 87% of the Bennett women, students, who were eligible to vote were registered and ready to vote. And so if I would stand in the chapel and give the call, the response would inevitably come. And it goes like this: Bennett bells. Bennett women are called bells. Bennett bells. And the call comes back, are voting bells. And so there's a college with an enormous tradition of engagement, of commitment to nonviolent social change.
Dr. Janetta Cole, let me ask you to speak now to those young people in our community who are not going to college for reasons that may be economic or academic, or their life is taking a different path than one that requires a college or that it's right for them. How can they be idealistic as well?
Well, it's a wonderful question, because you caught me. And by that I mean that I spend much of my time working within an arena that calls for diversity and inclusion, that says that not only on the question of race, but of gender and sexual orientation and physical and mental abilities and disabilities, religion, class, that we must be inclusive. And there I was, talking as if all young people are only going to college, when we know that that is not the case. I think each of us has a responsibility to find a way, whether we are in a formal educational setting or not, to treat ourselves to one of the most precious and powerful processes ever invented. It is called education. And it's not to be confused with schooling. When we come within the kindergarten as little tots and go K through 12 and into college and perhaps post-baccalaureate work, that's a schooling experience where education should be at its core. But education is a process open to all of us. And if there's one instrument that has helped, it is, of course, the technology that is now available. And even as I say that, I'm again aware that we must be inclusive and we must think about the diversity of circumstances that people are in. I can't assume that every single American has access to the internet. But increasingly we're getting there. And if one doesn't have that access in one's home, perhaps it's in that public library. It ought to be in at least the K through 12 schools. And so we need to create, in my view, an environment throughout our country that makes us an enormous learning community, that says we are curious about the world. Yes, we live locally, but we need to think globally. We need to not be so surprised when we look up and there's been a horrific natural disaster in Burma. And then we say, well, we're surprised. We can't get help into Burma. We ought to already know where Burma is and know something about the political and the economic circumstances in that country. It shouldn't be somehow the prized possession of faculty and students to know something happened called the Holocaust. There should be no American unaware of that horrific period in world history and her story. Everyone should know something at least about the parts of the world. When we go now to fill up our gas tanks and we're outraged, well, I'm outraged at what it cost. Every American citizen, not just faculty and students, should be aware of why that is happening. And so I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be truthful, and say that I wish that every individual in my country could have a college education, because I know how rich that experience is. I know how it changes one's life. But I'm now thinking that if everyone can't, what can we do within our communities to bring some of that experience to those who, for whatever reason, and it's often financial, cannot have that college education? You know, our public libraries are amazing places. Do we really take full advantage of them? What's happening now is we too often bowl alone, if I can use that expression, that reminds us that a sense of community and interconnectedness isn't quite the same as it used to be. Do we have places where folk can just sit and talk and play chess as elderly men used to do sometimes in the public parks? Are there moments when women, and there should be some men too, are in those parks taking care of their younger children, but engaging each other in conversation? And so I would hope that in a place called Asheville, that there's a lot of this learning and educating going on, but not just at Mars Hill College and not just at Asheville, the place of the University of North Carolina.
In all of these historic events that you've just referenced, it occurs to me that you are challenging us to think about the role of citizenship. Speaking to primarily young people at commencement at UNC Asheville and to our community through this television program, I wonder if you would speak to us of your acquired wisdom of the responsibilities of citizenship. What privilege does that give us? What power does that give us? But what must we do to be worthy of that? And we are all citizens,
It's true.
whether we have a document that says we are or not, and regardless of our color or our religion, our gender. How do we be good citizens?
For some reason, I immediately thought as you posed that question that everybody ought to have dual citizenship. Everybody. And that we would be a much better world if in every country, not only my own, we provided the incentives, we created the sense of responsibility to be a good citizen of the United States of America. But that's only one citizenship. You get to be a second citizen. You get to be a citizen of the world. I do worry when I see any signs that my country is not open in its thoughts, that we in any way take our enormous political power and see it as the basis of ruling the world. Or when we wish to pull back and to say only English spoken here, or we really aren't interested in how they do it over there in Europe. I think we aren't going to have any choice soon. Here's technology again that is connecting such parts of the universe. You and I could walk out of here and within a matter of minutes, we could be hooked up with the capital, Ouagadougou, in Burkina Faso, in Africa. We could, through technology, within a matter of minutes, we could be connected with Belize or with Vancouver, Canada. And so, how do we teach dual citizenship? How do we teach a responsibility to one's place of birth, but a responsibility to the world? And it's exciting to me to listen to young'uns again, who are very often leading the movement to protect our planet, who are saying, yes, we've got lots of stuff in the United States. It's not sometimes very well distributed, but we've got to think about what we do with our stuff that affects stuff or the scarcity of stuff around the world. So I kind of like this notion of dual citizenship for everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think you can understand from her comments exactly why Dr. Janetta Cole, having received an honorary degree at the University of North Carolina at Asheville on May 10th, is sought by foundations and organizations here in America and around the world, from the United Nations to the United Way of America, to universities in Africa, to her own organization at Bennett College, to add her wisdom, her knowledge, her perspective to the conversation about creating a better world. Dr. Cole, tell us about the Janetta B. Cole Global Diversity and Inclusion Institute.
Well, first of all, Brother Bill, it's a mouthful, I have to tell you. I was absolutely surprised when this institute was born, because if the colleagues and friends had told me that they were going to put my name on it, I would really have just said no. But it has such an important mission. And the mission is to advance the compelling case for for diversity and inclusion in the workplace and in the world place. The Institute works perhaps at this time most effectively with corporations, but we envision working ultimately with educational institutions, with social service institutions, with not-for-profit entities, to again advance this compelling case for diversity and inclusion. You know, in many ways, the corporate world is a little ahead of us, those of us in the academy, because you remember that expression, the business of America is business. Mm-hmm. And corporate leaders have discovered that there is not just a moral case for diversity, a reason to have a diverse workforce, but that there is an economic imperative. That if this business is to compete globally, then it must have the best ideas. It must have an environment in which productivity is constantly being generated. And the corporate folk are saying, that's why we need diversity and an inclusive environment. And so there is a business case for diversity. I also think there's a pedagogical case for diversity. I think we do not teach and learn well unless we are conscious of issues of diversity and inclusion.
Well, speaking of teaching, after you graduated from Oberlin and you did your graduate work at Northwestern, you were a teacher.
I'm still a teacher.
You're still a teacher.
I walk through the world fundamentally as a teacher.
Well, and then you became the first female African-American president of Spelman College in Atlanta. And many of us remember the significant moment of the gift from Bill Cosby and his wife to Spelman. One of the most distinguished of the schools in Atlanta and certainly in the nation. Then you became the only female African American to head two historically black colleges, Spelman College and Bennett College for Women in Greensboro. Teaching all the time. What makes a great teacher?
A turned-on learner. Passion for this uniquely human process of inquiry, of discovery, and I think of seeing the connection between the academic and the activist sides of life. I do move through the world as a teacher. I wasn't just kidding. Even during those two presidencies, I think whatever success I had in fundraising was because I really entered those situations thinking, now, how am I going to teach this foundation or this corporation or this government agency or this individual? How am I going to teach the importance of philanthropy, the importance of supporting an educational institution? But you know, it's a sacred, sacred work. To teach is sacred. To learn is perhaps even more sacred.
Explain.
We don't stop every moment to say what is secular and what is sacred. But we do reserve that notion of the sacred for that which is special. Sometimes we want to be even more specific and say that which is spiritual. If you've ever been in a classroom where it's going well, and that means it's not the old banking model where the teacher is standing there depositing information into the heads of the students and then looking for withdrawal. But there's that interaction going on. And all of a sudden, a student begins to connect what is being said with her own life, or a young man has almost that light bulb go on, he has just gotten it. That is really a sacred moment. It's one of the most beautiful things that can happen. You know, there's so many ways to describe education, but I do have a favorite. Words that were used by a Mississippi slave owner. The year was 1832. He said, "Slavery and knowledge are incompatible." There was a reason that black folk were denied the right to learn, to read and to write, because ultimately it would challenge slavery. And though we no longer have formalized slavery in our country, I still see education as a great liberator of minds and hearts and souls. And so when we as educational institutions like UNC Asheville or any other public or private college, any K through 12 institution, when we set about our work, I think we need to see it as sacred work, because the potential is to truly, truly free us. If you ask me, what would I do if I had the power to do only one thing, to create monumental change, long-lasting change? I would say, educate young folk well. Actually, Bill, I would say, and put a special emphasis on the education of girls.
In your commencement address, you challenged our students and therefore their parents who were in the audience, their brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, godparents, grandparents, and I'm quoting you here, to address bigotry and discrimination wherever we find it and whenever we find it, in our homes, our schools, our places of worship, our places of recreation, workplace, and worldplace. How would you address our larger community? The university is an integral part of our community, of our state, nation, and we would say increasingly the world. The same message to our larger community, to address bigotry, discrimination whenever and wherever we find it. Can you take the same message to the larger scale?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, there are friends of our community listening to this program who didn't get to hear your commencement address, who would appreciate knowing your thoughts there.
Well, the first thing that I really want to say, and I hope I can communicate this well, is that clearly, as an African American woman, I have a great concern about both racism and sexism. But as I said yesterday in the commencement address, each of us has multiple identities. Each of us is made up of many attributes. And while I would hope that throughout the Asheville community, there would be a constant struggle against racism and against sexism, let us remember that there are many forms of bigotry and discrimination. And so what I'm really saying is you can't go very far before you're going to run into some of it. It's a mindset that says, I will learn more, I will understand more, I will be a richer person if I can include more folk. I I really want to share something that I hope is appropriate to share. I was picked up today at the airport by someone who is among my closest friends and colleagues. Her name is Jane Fernandez. She is the University of North Carolina at Asheville's new Vice Chancellor and Provost. Jane Fernandez is deaf. As I said yesterday in my commencement address, I am so deeply proud of this university for that appointment. It says that this university is ready to understand diversity and inclusion in its multiple expressions. But here's the point that I wanted to share. As Jane and I communicated, and I'll admit we talked in glowing terms about the Sister Vice Chancellor, Ann Ponder. What Jane said was how amazing, and I would add grace-filled it is, that Ann Ponder said to Jane Fernandez, you know, we all need to learn to sign. That way, you, Jane Fernandez, will always feel included. That is a way of looking at the world that is just extraordinary. It's not, Jane Fernandez, how can you figure out how to communicate with those of us who speak and who hear? It was, how can we all become richer by learning a new way of communicating? And Jane Fernandez, in the process, you will feel included. You know, in the city of Asheville, it doesn't take a lot to have an experience in diversity and inclusion. You're walking down the street and you see an elderly person. Wouldn't it be interesting to see if you could be of help to that individual? There might be someone who is physically challenged. You might stop and think, that wheelchair, it would have an easier way if there were a cutout in the sidewalk. But you know what? We've also got to have more cutouts in our minds so that we think in those terms. It's a season. It's called Christmas. And Asheville is all lit up. And red and green is everywhere. What does it take for us to add the sensitivity that those of the Jewish faith, of the Islamic faith, of the Hindu, of the Buddhist faith, that their traditions need to be honored as well? And certainly on the question of class, if we each just had more sensitivity to what it means to be in the category of the haves and the category of the have-nots, then it's not just that we are reaching out and doing for those who do not have. You know better than I from your years in the world of philanthropy that the real recipients of philanthropy are not those who receive, it's those of us who give. So I don't see diversity and inclusion as this special thing over here. We'll have a special course about it, or, you know, we'll think about it on Monday nights. It needs to be a part of the way that we move through the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you agree with me that it's such a privilege for us in Asheville to have Dr. Cole with us. As a writer and as a thinker, there's much more that you can read of her work. I would encourage you to Google Dr. Cole, and I'm going to spell that because her first name does have a unique spelling. It's Johnnettaba Cole. And you will find a wealth of information that will just let you know how privileged we've been to have this distinguished citizen of the world join us in Asheville. Dr. Cole, don't be a stranger. You have
Thank you.
friends here. You will make more friends here. And we would love to have the grace of your presence in our community even more.
Don't forget, I am now an alumna. It happened
absolutely are.
yesterday.
Great. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure being with you today.